The open ocean is one of the largest habitats on Earth, encompassing regions ranging from polar to tropical. In such a vast space, it should not be surprising to find a great many forms of life, even if large swathes of the ocean appear to be relatively empty. In a vast series of ecosystems with large populations of resident organisms, one may well expect considerable variety in the forms of life encountered. With such variety, the occasional oddity is all but assured. In fact, there are a great many marine species that seem quite unusual, at least by human standards, taking on rather unexpected forms and habits. For today, let us focus upon just one of these groups. Most people are familiar enough with snails and slugs, or at least those of the terrestrial variety. These creatures are collectively known as gastropods, and they are a type of mollusk. Their scientific name is rather apt, as it roughly translates into stomach foot. A common feature of these familiar organisms is the presence of a muscular foot on the underside of the body. On land, the slugs and snails are slow-moving creatures that use this distinctive foot to creep along the ground and leave a trail of slime in their wake. The obvious distinction between a snail and a slug is the presence or absence of a shell. Beyond this, on land at least, there is relatively little variation. The majority of terrestrial gastropods are largely herbivores or scavengers, and they tend to mostly exhibit various hues of gray, brown, or green. In the ocean, one may find considerably greater variety among the sea snails and sea slugs. The forms are more diverse, as are the lifestyles. For example, a great many of these marine mollusks are predators rather than herbivores. Some species may also grow to sizes that would put most of their land-dwelling cousins to shame. Bright colors, while not universal, are quite commonplace as well. Yet, even here, we see a similar sort of motion in the majority of marine species, creeping over a surface using the foot and leaving a trail of mucus behind them in the process. It seems to be a reliable sort of rule for the gastropods, but as with many rules, there are some remarkable exceptions. The most striking exception in this case would most likely be the Order Pteropoda within the class Gastropoda. While a gastropod may be interpreted as a stomach foot, a pteropod may be interpreted as a wing foot. This group consists of swimming gastropods that spend their lives in the open ocean, most often near the surface. The Order Pteropoda includes both snails and slugs, divided into two suborders. The snails are in the suborder Thecosomata, which roughly means shell body, or body with a shell. The slugs are in the order Gymnosomata, which roughly means naked body, or, put more into context, body without a shell. Both of these suborders are filled with surprisingly graceful creatures, with largely translucent forms. It is almost as if a strange array of glass sculptures had come to life and started swimming. The common names reflect this aesthetic, as the swimming snails are also known as sea butterflies, while the swimming slugs are often referred to as sea angels. Very charming, whimsical names overall. Yet, of course, everything is not always as it seems. What a creature looks like and what it actually is may prove to be very different indeed. There is a good deal of variety in the forms pteropods take, and a few of these variations can be a bit troublesome. For example, while most of the Thecosomata have some version of the familiar spiral snail shell, there are departures from this pattern. This does make a degree of sense, as a proper snail shell can be quite heavy. The sea butterflies have at most a relatively thin and lightweight shell, as anything more sturdy would prevent them from doing anything but flopping about helplessly on the sea floor. Still, the degree of lightening is somewhat more pronounced in certain groups. In the family Symbuliidae, the standard shell that is present in the larval stage is discarded by adulthood, and a sort of false shell made of cartilage takes its place. This pseudoconch is lighter than a standard shell, while still affording at least a modicum of protection. The family Desmopteridae takes this loss one step further, dispensing with the adult shell altogether, yet they do still retain a similar overall shape to that of the other sea butterflies. Despite the variations within the two pteropod suborders, the two basic patterns of the Thecosomata and Gymnosomata remain fairly recognizable. These patterns may be more easily understood by focusing upon two particularly well-studied species within the group. Both of these species are relatively large and fairly abundant in certain parts of the world's oceans. Representing the Thecosomata, we have the species Slimacina helicina. The genus name refers to a snail or a slug, while the species name refers to a spiral or a coil. Nothing terribly unexpected in such a name, and it is accurate enough, though it does miss something of the pelagic lifestyle of the species. Limacina, like most others of its suborder, has a fairly rounded body contained within a translucent spiral shell. The foot seen in other gastropods is modified into a pair of lobes, sometimes known as parapodia. Most commonly, the shell hangs suspended beneath this pair of wings as the snail flies along through the water. I say flies rather than swims because of an interesting bit of convergent evolution. Despite being very different creatures, sea butterflies and actual butterflies use very similar wing movements in their locomotion. At first this seems quite preposterous, as air and seawater are quite different substances, and traveling through them should be fairly different as well. A proper explanation for this unexpected convergence would require delving into a few basic fluid mechanics. I have prepared an accompanying video for this purpose as a sort of addendum. A link can be found in this video's description. For now, it is sufficient to say that a bit of comparative calculation reveals surprisingly similar fluid mechanics in the flight of a sea butterfly and the flight of an actual butterfly. Since the physics are so similar, the wing movements are also quite similar. Aspiring entomologists and students of biomechanics might recognize the so-called clap and fling pattern seen in hovering insects and swimming pteropods. This odd convergence is made all the more remarkable by the differences in the actual wing structures. An insect wing is essentially a lifeless flexible membrane held between several rigid veins. These veins are connected to a few rigid plates at the wing base, which are in turn connected to the thorax. These so-called basal sclerites serve as articulation points to guide the movement of the overall structure of the wing. In contrast, a pteropod wing is a soft structure consisting of several layers of muscle with a narrow fluid space in the middle. The muscle layer above the central space consists of two sheets of opposing oblique muscle. A similar pair of oblique muscle sheets is also below the central space. Collectively, these four outer layers allow the wing to twist and bend. The central fluid space has various muscle fibers that run from the front of the wing to the back, from the top to the bottom, and from the tip to the base. This last group of fibers actually continues through the body and into the opposite wing. These central muscle fibers help to maintain the shape of the wing against the internal fluid pressure and allow it to be retracted to some degree. At this point, it is worth noting that much of the movement of a pteropod is based upon the balance between muscle contraction and internal fluid pressure. This is the case with any soft-bodied animal, and it is the basis of what is known as a hydrostatic skeleton. While the sea butterflies like Limacina helicina have a shell, their actual wings are entirely lacking in rigid skeletal structures. Indeed, apart from the shell, the only hard structure you're likely to find in a sea butterfly would be its radula. The radula, commonly seen in most mollusk groups, is a sort of tongue with teeth. It is used to rasp away at food. On land, one can hear a radula at work by listening to a garden slug rather closely as it feeds on a leaf. One would hear a series of soft crunching noises, or more particularly, rasping noises, as the radula is repeatedly brought forward and drawn slowly back to scrape off a bit more leaf tissue. One can sometimes see the radula at work in an aquarium snail as it scrapes algae off of the glass while climbing along the internal wall. Of course, a sea butterfly needs to procure food for this radula to process, and most species do this by producing a sort of mucus net and letting it drag through the water. The sticky substance snares little bits of plankton, and eventually the net is withdrawn and the captured particles are processed and eaten. This may seem like a rather unusual dining method, but it pales in comparison to the feeding habits of the sea angels. A suitable representative for this group would be Cleone limacina. The genus name here likely refers to the mythical Greek muse Cleo. Like other sea angels, Cleone has a somewhat angelic appearance, albeit also rather alien and unusual. The body is largely transparent, though some internal structures are more opaque, with hues ranging from yellow through orange and red. Like others of the Gymnosomata, there is no shell whatsoever. The body is relatively elongated and tapers to a blunt tail at the back. The head is fairly globular, with two soft horns that are likely sensory in function. The wings are relatively small compared to those of a sea butterfly. Then again, one might suppose that without the weight of a shell, they wouldn't need to be quite as large. Overall, Cleone looks relatively sleek and even athletic in comparison to its somewhat lugubrious cousins. There is a surprisingly sinister reason for this difference in physique. Unlike most sea butterflies, sea angels are distinctly predatory. One might ask how such an inoffensive-looking creature could possibly prey upon anything. The answer becomes apparent by watching Cleone as it feeds. This sea angel has two basic gaits, roughly analogous to what we might consider to be walking and running. Typically, the walking gait is a slow, steady wing beat that carries it lazily through the water. When it senses its preferred prey, this walk becomes a run as the wings begin to carry it forward with alarming speed. It is perhaps no mere coincidence that the species name Limacina happens to be the same word as the genus name for our representative sea butterfly species. Sea angels feed almost exclusively upon sea butterflies, and the favorite food of Cleone limacina is in fact Limacina helicina. Of course, the sea butterfly will try to escape its pursuer, but sea angels tend to be a good deal faster. The protective shell turns out to be of little use against this particular specialist. First, as the Cleone approaches its prey, its head rather alarmingly splits open, with each side drawing back. As this happens, a series of 6 tentacles spring forward, driven by internal hydraulic pressure. These so-called buccal cones grip the shell of the sea butterfly and hold it securely in place. With its prey captured, the Cleone reveals the rest of its feeding apparatus. A pair of sinister appendages emerges from the mouth. Each of these bears a series of sharp hooks, which are used to seize the sea butterfly and rip it out of its shell. Bit by bit, the unfortunate creature is rasped into tiny shreds by the radula and ultimately devoured. What remains of the shell is left to drift down into the benighted depths as the sea angel retracts its gruesome feeding structures and continues placidly on its way. Naturally, this is all rather ghoulish, but such is often the case with predation. To make things even worse for the sea butterflies, they have a wide variety of predators alongside the sea angels. Many sorts of fish will consume them, and whales and seabirds are also known to feed on them. With so many predators and such abundant populations, the pteropods form an important link in the food web, connecting plankton to a fair number of larger species. Despite their unusual forms and habits, and the disturbing feeding methods of the sea angels, these creatures are significant and important residents in the oceans of the world. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have enjoyed today's little foray into the unknown. If you are still curious and wish to venture a little further, here are a few things you might consider looking into. If you found this video enjoyable, do feel free to leave a like. If you believe others might enjoy it, by all means, share. If you wish to see more of this channel, a subscription should prove quite helpful. Until next time.